The year was 1888, and London was a city of contrasts. By day, its streets reflected the power of an empire at its height. But by night, in the East End, shadows concealed misery, poverty, and desperation. Whitechapel, a slum district of narrow alleys and gaslit corners, teemed with the homeless, the destitute, and women forced into prostitution to survive. It was here, in the choking fog and filth of London's underbelly, that a killer emerged. One who would etch his name into history, not with certainty, but with terror and mystery. He would come to be known as Jack the Ripper. The killings began in late summer. On August 31st, 1888, a woman named Mary Ann Polly Nichols was found lying on Bucks Row, her throat slashed so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Her abdomen was mutilated, her body left exposed in the darkness. Nichols was 43, a mother estranged from her family, eking out survival through casual prostitution. The brutality of her death shocked even hardened policemen. Yet, at the time, no one realized this was only the beginning. A week later, on September 8th, Annie Chapman was discovered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street. Like Nichols, her throat had been slashed, her body horrifically mutilated. Her abdomen was cut open, and some of her organs had been removed. The precision suggested not just rage, but skill. Perhaps the hand of someone with medical training. Police began to suspect they were dealing with a serial killer, a term not yet common in Victorian England, but one the public would soon come to understand. Fear gripped Whitechapel. The poor, who lived in constant danger of disease, hunger, and violence, now faced an invisible predator. Prostitutes, already vulnerable, were his chosen victims. They worked in alleys and doorways, easy prey for someone who knew the streets. Women began to walk in pairs, but poverty drove them back into the arms of risk. The night of September 30th became known as the double event. In the early hours, the body of Elizabeth Stride was found in Dutfield's yard, her throat freshly cut. Unlike the earlier victims, her body bore no mutilations, leading some to believe the killer had been interrupted. Barely 45 minutes later, less than a mile away, Catherine Eddowes was discovered in Mitre Square. Her murder was savage. Her throat cut, her face slashed with deep, deliberate cuts, her abdomen ripped open, organs again removed. A piece of her bloody apron was later found on Goulston Street, near a cryptic message chalked on a wall. "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Authorities quickly erased the graffiti, fearing anti-Semitic riots, but questions lingered. Was it the killer's taunt, or a coincidence? The press seized upon the murders with morbid fascination. Newspapers churned out sensational headlines, feeding fear and hysteria. Letters began to arrive at police stations and newsrooms, claiming to be from the killer himself. Most were hoaxes, but one in particular, signed Jack the Ripper, burned into history. Written in red ink, it boasted of the killings and mocked the police. Another, the so-called From Hell letter, arrived with half a human kidney, preserved in alcohol. A grim token allegedly taken from Catherine Eddowes, whether authentic or the work of a hoaxer. The letters amplified the legend of the Ripper, turning him from a faceless murderer into a phantom haunting the public imagination. The final canonical victim was Mary Jane Kelly, found on November 9, 1888, in her small rented room in Miller's Court. Unlike the earlier killings on dark streets, this murder occurred indoors, giving the killer more time and privacy. The result was grotesque beyond comprehension. Kelly's body was mutilated beyond recognition, her flesh carved and scattered, her organs removed and arranged around the bed. even seasoned detectives recoiled at the scene. It was the apex of the Ripper's brutality, and, strangely, it marked the end. After Kelly, the murders ceased, at least in the form attributed to Jack the Ripper. Police were under immense pressure. Scotland Yard deployed detectives day and night, interviewing hundreds, inspecting lodging houses, and questioning suspects. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, even ordered increased patrols. But the killer always slipped through the cracks. The East End's labyrinthine alleys and transient population made it nearly impossible to track him. In the absence of an arrest, speculation flourished. Suspects ranged from the plausible to the absurd. Some pointed to local butchers or medical students, men with knowledge of anatomy and access to knives. Others suspected foreigners, feeding into xenophobic fears of immigrants in Whitechapel. One theory implicated Montague John Druitt, a barrister whose suicide in December 1888 coincided with the end of the murders. Another focused on Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jewish immigrant later confined to an asylum, whose mental illness and misogyny fit a disturbing profile. Still others believed in conspiracy, that the murders were covered up because the killer was of high social standing, perhaps even linked to the royal family. The so-called royal conspiracy theory suggested that Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, or his physician Sir William Gull, was involved. A claim that has never been substantiated but refuses to die. Beyond suspects, questions linger about motive. Were the killings the work of a sexually driven sadist, a maniac driven by hatred of prostitutes, or, as some modern theorists propose, a killer enacting ritual or symbolic violence? The removal of organs suggested a fascination with anatomy, perhaps tied to the era's interest in dissection and medical science. Yet no clear psychological profile has ever solved the riddle. The failure to catch Jack the Ripper left scars on both law enforcement and society. The murders exposed the harsh realities of life in Whitechapel: poverty, crime, the vulnerability of women forced into prostitution. The brutality of the crimes shocked Victorian sensibilities and highlighted the gulf between the wealthy West End and the impoverished East. For the police, their inability to stop the killings was a humiliation that tarnished Scotland Yard's reputation. In the years since, the Ripper has become less a man than a myth, a symbol of evil that thrives in secrecy. Books, films, and theories continue to resurrect him, each claiming to have found the true killer. Yet the fact remains, no one was ever arrested, no one ever confessed, and no definitive evidence has ever emerged. The case is not merely unsolved, it is unending, a puzzle that seems to grow darker the more it is studied. Whitechapel itself has changed, but the shadow lingers. Tourists still walk the same streets, following the paths of the Ripper's victims. Museums display artifacts, photographs, and facsimiles of the haunting letters. Forensic experts continue to test old evidence, hoping that DNA or modern science might yield what Victorian detectives could not. But perhaps the power of the Ripper lies precisely in the unknown. His murders were not only acts of violence, but acts of fear. Killings that turned the dark alleys of London into a hunting ground and left behind not closure, but questions. Was he a local drunk with a blade, or a gentleman with secrets? Was he one man, or more than one? Why did the killings stop? What is certain is that between August and November 1888, 5 women, Nichols, Chatman, Stride, Eidos, and Kelly, were butchered in ways too horrific to forget. They were not just victims of a faceless killer, but of the circumstances of poverty, desperation, and neglect. Jack the Ripper's name lives on, but their names are the true markers of the tragedy. More than a century later, Jack the Ripper remains the archetype of the unsolved killer, a phantom of gaslit London whose identity is still hidden behind the fog. His legacy is not justice or truth, but mystery, a lingering reminder that some crimes resist explanation, and some monsters remain shadows in history. That's it for today. Until the next mystery, stay vigilant.